Great. Well, let's get recording. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We are at the Request for Proposal Information session hosted by the Office of Community and Civic Life. We're here to talk about the request for proposals that we issued a few weeks ago to talk about liability insurance assistance for Southwest neighborhood associations and other volunteer-led groups in Southwest Portland. Just a quick note, some logistics that we will have a little presentation for you all. And as you have questions, please feel free to pop those into the chat, but we can also unmute folks towards the end and have you actually ask your question verbally if you prefer that as well. And it looks like Pollyann said everyone is able to speak now as well. So
I unmuted him already, yeah.
Great, so if we could hold our questions towards the end, that would be great. And yes, to Thomas's questions, we are recording this session. We will post it on our website and share that with everyone afterwards so that folks that weren't able to join us today are able to view the presentation as well. So with that, let's get started. We have a quick set of introductions. Pollyann, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So I'll introduce myself first. I'm Andrea Williams. I'm the Partnerships Manager at the Office of Community and Civic Life. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be just running through our agenda today and some brief background about our office. And I am joined here by my colleagues. I'll invite Shook to share, and then after that, Suk.
Hi, good afternoon. Nice to be here, and welcome to all participants. My name is Shuk Arvjanov. My pronouns he, him, and his. I'm Civic Engagement Program Coordinator with the Bureau of Office of Community and Civic Life. Nice to be here, and I will be talking about through the RFP process after Andrea gives the introduction to and take us on the process of this RFP again and what steps we need to take and services needed. Thank you. And I will pass to Suk.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zokri. I serve as Director for the Office of Community and Civic Life, and I use she, her pronouns. Thank you for joining us today. We know today is a very big, significant afternoon if you've been listening to the news, so appreciate your being with us today. And we didn't put it on the slide, and you probably already know this famous person, but let me pass it to Pollyann to introduce herself.
So kind. Pollyann Birch, I'm also with Civic Life. I'm the administrative specialist, and I will be doing the Zoom and the PowerPoint today, kind of in support. Thanks.
Thanks. Yes, thank you, Pollyann, and thank you, everyone. So our quick agenda today, we want to provide a little bit of context about our Bureau, the Office of Community and Civic Life, or for short, we call ourselves Civic Life, and a little bit of context about why we are issuing this RFP. So we'll talk about the transition plan for Southwest Portland neighborhood services. So we'll spend about 10 minutes on that. We'll review the RFP information and process, and Shook will cover that. And then we would love to hear questions from you all so that we can address those. And that's the main purpose of why we're having this information session. So that's our short agenda. A little bit about Civic Life so you know who we are and our values. Civic Life is all about building systems that ensure equitable outcomes for all communities. And we do that through a variety of programs. And there's several examples that we have here, one of which many folks know about our Bureau, which is supporting communities in creating safe, fun, and inclusive neighborhoods. We also provide resources for immigrant and refugee communities in the Portland area. We also ensure equitable outcomes for all communities by investing in community power through the reinvestment of cannabis tax funds into communities targeted and harmed by past cannabis prohibition. We also are teaching communities about and providing resources for conflict resolution through a program we call Constructing Civic Dialogues. And we support leadership development for Black, Indigenous, people of color, immigrant and refugee communities. And next slide, please. In addition to all of those things, we also help businesses grow while protecting patrons and communities by leading safe, sensible, equitable, and environmentally friendly regulation through our noise and liquor programs. We build stronger communities by connecting neighborhood groups to resources and funding. We connect people to local government by inviting Portlanders to join advisory committees that impact policies and budgets. And finally, we invest in programs to train diverse young leaders to engage in and lead on civic matters, and creating a more representative local government through the Multnomah Youth Commission. So this is just an example of the type of bureau we are and the kind of things we do. To my first bullet point about creating inclusive, safe, and welcoming neighborhoods goes along the lines of, what is happening in Southwest Portland. So yes, Polly, that next slide would be helpful. So as some folks may know, through a council ordinance that was passed on March 10th, which Shook will discuss, we are going through a transition of working with a previous partner, a nonprofit partner named Sweeney, to providing services directly through Civic Life as a bureau to Southwest neighborhood associations and volunteer-led organizations in Southwest. And we need a nonprofit partner to work with us on some things like the insurance coverage. So to give people a sense of where we're at with this transition from Sweeney to Civic Life run neighborhood support services, we've already been engaging with neighborhood associations and connecting to Southwest neighborhoods. We had 2 open houses a few weeks ago, and we've been connecting with neighborhood associations one-on-one by attending their evening board meetings. Of course, a big part of what we're doing is this insurance coverage, which is what we're here to talk about today. We're currently in the process of launching this request for proposals to select a qualified nonprofit organization to provide liability insurance coverage to Southwest neighborhoods, because it is a really critical part of allowing volunteer-led groups to organize events and engage civically, is providing that liability insurance so that they can do that according to city requirements and standards. Thirdly, we are in the process of hiring 2 coordinators to deliver services directly to neighborhoods and place-based volunteer community groups in Southwest Portland. These 2 coordinators we hope to have hired by July 1, and eventually they will become this nonprofit partner's key point of contact as we coordinate liability insurance and other organizational support services for Southwest neighborhoods. And so if you have any, if you need to look up any of this additional information, we all provide it on this website posted on the slide here, where we are updating it constantly about the various stages of this transition in Southwest, in the Southwest neighborhoods. So just wanted to provide you a little bit of that context, but today we'll be focusing on that insurance coverage request for proposals. So I will ask Polly to please go to the next slide, and I'll hand it to Shook.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Andrea, for this great overview of transition plan. I'll talk about the insurance part of it. The instrumental part of this transition is to provide insurance coverage for neighborhoods in Southwest of Portland. So if you see the ordinance number here, 190321, which was passed by City Council on March 10 to authorize a grant agreement with nonprofit organization to provide liability insurance coverage for neighborhood associations in Southwest of Portland. So if you're interested to see the full text of this ordinance, you can go to city website, which is portlandoregon.gov, and you go to the auditors page and search it by the ordinance number, and you get the full document. Yes, and first of all, again, the ordinance number, and through this RFP process, we're looking, Civic Life is looking for nonprofit organization to assist, again, neighborhood associations and community groups in Southwest Portland to obtain organizational liability coverage to support their community ability to in their community work and civic engagement activities. Thank you. Next slide, please. So who are these organizations? What services are needed? I'll talk about this. So we are looking again for organizations who would procure and obtain insurance for 17 neighborhood associations in southwest of Portland and other nonprofits. So before I go and talk about each insurance coverage, recommendation liabilities, let me just describe a little bit why city requires the insurance, because even though we're working in this kind of environment, I thought it would be helpful to provide some of the description here. So as you may know, city maintains, first of all, its own insurance. We do have our own insurance for the work that we do directly. So city in turn requires contractors and partners to carry this insurance for the work performed by these partner organizations. So that's why first of all, we require this insurance. So in terms of the insurance, why one might say, well, why city cannot take this responsibility? We can, because if we did that, if we take the role of being the ultimate and responsible entity, then we kind of became like an insurance agency, which we're not. So city does not collect any money in form of the premium payments from for contractors and partners. So like an insurance company. What we do, we in turn pay partners to promote and to pay partners for their work on their contracts to do the work in the community. So then say like during the work, mostly things don't go like bad, but let's say if that work is faulty or causes injury or damage to a third party, right? Then city would then be responsible for damages that partner caused. So that's why since it presents financial risk to the city, we require insurance partners to carry the insurance. Also, I think it's a good practice when partners carry insurance. It kind of provides the accountability and improves quality of work in the community. So what those coverages are, which city standard coverages, which city requires. First is commercial general liability, CGL, and recommended required limits is 2 million per occurrence. And I'll talk a little bit more about these numbers in my next slide. Next is auto liability at 2 million per accident. Third is worker compensation. It used to be $500,000, but city upgraded to 1 million per accident required, 1 million per employee, and 1 million for disease aggregate. So fourth required liability insurance is physical abuse and molestation. And this really depends on the type of work being performed by a partner. Let's say, just example, if partner has a $5,000 annual budget, but this partner does weekly, monthly events involving large crowds, so their coverage comes in handy in this place. So if organization do, what I want to say that it's not the value of the contract where we need to look at the insurance coverages and liabilities. It's what what risks involved through all those meetings, to childcare exposures, large crowd gatherings. If somebody does the fireworks, there's some exposure to vulnerability there. And umbrella. Umbrella is like a booster to all these above mentioned commercial, automobile, and worker compensation insurance. It serves like a booster. For example, if organization has already have $1 million general liability, auto, and we require 2 million here. Oops, what happened? Oh, here we go. Then umbrella could play its role like a booster, and organization can buy up the coverage to make it up to a 2 million required. So next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, example certificate. So when organization, when organization goes out and procures and obtains the insurance, usually, and this is typical, it could be a familiar form to you. There are two certificates. I just wanted to provide you with a visual. The purpose of this meeting is not to go through in details of it, but just again, to give you a visual. So if you see my mouse, there's arrows here that this certificate, a Core 25 form, provides commercial general liability, and these are the amounts. And then, of course, it lists the organization on the top and who the insured is and who's the producer, the broker. It also includes the second arrow going down the list is automobile liability. And then with that, if you look under it, it also, since it looks like this organization example here, they bought up umbrella coverage as well. And then worker compensation. The reason that worker compensation numbers are empty here, some insurance companies and brokers provide additional certificate for a worker compensation and employee liability. So in some forms, you will see it listed here. It would be here at the 1 million. If it's empty, that means that organization or broker would provide a separate certificate example. So City of Portland should be listed here. One more thing. So since for our scenario here, since we will be obtaining insurance for 17 neighborhood associations, there's one more instrumental and important form here on the side, which called Form CG 2026. What the good thing about this form is that in addition to this original certificate, it lists all the additional insured designated person or organization. So the second form has 24 pages. I didn't put, of course, all 24 pages of it. But here, what you would see, like a City of Portland listed, and down the list, if you go through the several next pages down the list here on this form, it will have all the organization names and listed here. Important to consider here, if you look into these two documents, like if you see this arrow looking up here on the first original certificate, PHPK and then a long number here, that's the policy number. It's a very important that this policy number associates with the policy number on the next document, because in practice, in my practice, what happened before, some organization provide this main certificate, but they apply the second form CG 2026 from other policies. So that doesn't work. So this certificate insurance policy number should match. Again, this is just providing you a visual. And when a finalist is identified per our timeline in this RFP process, we'll have a more detailed session on these liabilities I mentioned, and we go through these in a very detail. So that would be myself, Andrea, and beyond the next July, it will be either us and two other coordinators who will be hired. So next slide, please. So additional services. As you know, all these organizations, neighborhood associations are new and, volunteer-based. I mean, new for you, I mean. And since they are volunteer-based, some may not have the proper infrastructure for their, or staff for their accounting systems, or like to coordinate and run their bank accounts, and they might be seeking technical support and other services. That's why we thought it would be very important and useful through this RFP process, in addition to seeking for an organization who provide insurance, obtaining insurance for our partners, to have if organization would be willing and open to provide fiscal sponsorship. So this is something for applying organization to consider as additional service. And of course, this service, as I see in the RFP document, could be in addition as a fee, additional fee beyond $20,000 per year per insurance purposes. I forgot to mention that for just for budget purposes, this fiscal year, the insurance amount, the cost for all these 17 neighborhood associations was around $10,000. So just to give you the rough idea. Next slide, please. And yeah, this is our timeline. That's where we are today. Information session, April 20. And written proposals would be due on May 5th. And then after we notify applicants, finalists on May 17, that would give us good 5-6 weeks to work together on drafting the grant agreement. And the reason I wanted to point out why it takes so long to draft the grant agreement is because we will initiate the grant agreement, Office of Community and Civic Life, but then all grant agreements get vetted by our risk management, Office of Finance and Revenue Bureau, and attorney offices. So every office take a little bit of time, and they have the large queue of other agreements by that time of the year. So that's why we estimate about 5 weeks for a grant agreement to be drafted. So the good news about the specific RFP, since it's already been authorized by council through the number I just gave you in the beginning of my presentation, we don't have to go back to a council. So we will just take time to draft our agreement and to circulate it through our other colleagues in the Bureau. So yeah, in July 1, our work begins, new fiscal year. Next slide, please. Yes, eligibilities. Who are eligible to apply in this RFP process? The first, organization must be 501c3 nonprofit, and of course, with ability to serve Southwest Portland, and which is not required. An organization does not need to be required to be based in Southwest Portland. Second, it should have a healthy financial standing, have demonstrated a history of sound financial management, including and not limited to board oversight, audited financial statements, etc. The third, obtain and provide quotes for insurance requirements described. Well, if I could add here a little bit, I would say this is very helpful as you prepare your RFPs to obtain some quotes, just to give you an idea for your budgeting reasons. But also, as I mentioned, we have only 4 required coverage liabilities, which is commercial, auto, worker comp, and physical abuse and molestation. And for example, when we attended and communicated to many neighborhood associations, so one other insurance came up, which is directors and officers coverage, came up as a need. So I would, for the reasons of this RFP, I think it would be wise to obtain a general quote. But once finalists identified and when we start drafting our agreement, I think it would be also helpful for finalist organization to meet and have meeting sessions with 17 neighborhood associations and to identify what other optional insurance coverages might be needed. One of them, it could be, again, directors and officers, liability coverage, and it could be anything. I mean, as you may know, organization can purchase insurance for anything, which may happen from fire to flooding to anything, but that doesn't mean that you would need to provide 4 required and 17 other optional insurance coverages. That would really put your cost really high, even though technically you can do that. But I would encourage at that time meeting with 17 organizations, neighborhood associations, and identify what those additional optional coverages might be required beyond this city required ones. And then, of course, the last is to complete application at the website you see, portland.gov, Civic Grants RFP. Next slide, please. Yeah, and that concludes our part on the RFP steps and coverage limits and recommendations. And we would like to take a time to see if you have any questions. I'm not specific. In this RFP presentation, I did not go through the questionnaire because it's pretty self-explanatory. But as you start writing your application and say before May 5, when it's a deadline, if you have any questions, you can still email me and ask question, and I would be happy to provide clarifications. And then, yeah, we can take any questions, and panel will be available right now and beyond. After this meeting, you could use this email.
There are a few questions in the chat. Do you want I should read those off first, Shook? Or
Yes.
Okay. So the first one, yes, we are recording. I think that was mentioned. The second one, will a new RFP amended be issued with amount levels? And then Sook had posted the new RFP in the chat, so please look for that link in there. Are tech assistance and financial or fiscal sponsorships fees to be covered by this $20,000, or are the fees to be in addition to that contract amount?
I can answer that. The insurance RFP is for 3 years, 20,000 each year. That makes it 60,000 total for 3 years. And as I read and as we discussed, and I mentioned earlier today, the fiscal sponsorship is additional to beyond this insurance amount. Yes, and that's I wouldn't be able to say that it's like 10 or 20,000. It depends. It's a very unique to each organization. Again, that doesn't mean all 17 organizations could request a fiscal sponsor, or maybe only 2 or 5. So depending on that, at this point, we just want to identify finalist organization willingness to be open and be able to provide fiscal sponsorship. But when time comes and when we realize how many organizations are interested, that would do the separate budget. And at that point, yes, it's beyond 60,000 for 3 years for insurance.
And there was a question about examples of activities that neighborhood associations are doing and who is insuring them now. And Andrea says that Sweeney is providing insurance coverage until June 30th, 2021. And neighborhood associations are largely doing virtual meetings, but they do have other events like National Night Out for Justice and Equity, I think is the new title of that. But then another question from Thomas, do any of the neighborhood associations have employees? If not, why are we using workers, or why is workers' comp required?
Andrea was able to participate in some of their meetings. I would say, as far as I know, all of them are volunteer based, but the District Coalition Office, Sweeney, who used to cover the insurance for all of them, they were staff. So that's why we required the worker comp insurance. So, and all of our contracts require worker comp, so we can I'm not insurance agent or I'm in a revenue risk management. I can circulate that back to this question back to our risk management and ask for them. But if Andre, if you could, if you have other feedback.
Can I jump in, Chuck?
Yes,
Chuck, can you
please.
go back? I think, Thomas, when your question came in, we were on the slide that said services needed, and I want to point out something. So can you go back, Pollyann?
Yeah,
That's services needed.
additional services,
Bit of a, I can see the, go back further.
right there.
Here we are talking about two different things, and I can see why our presentation was a little bit confusing. We're talking about the assistance that we want to provide to the neighborhood associations. And then we say, and in order to be that one contractor with the city, you need to have these things. So we know that they're slightly different. So to be the one nonprofit contractor with the city, you probably have staff. That's why you see workers' compensation. But we know that because neighborhood associations don't have staff, that what you're extending usually as an additional named insured doesn't need to include workers' comp for what you're extending. But in order to hold a contract, you as a nonprofit need to be able to have provide worker compensation if you have employees, you probably do. So, so anyway, so that's where I think when you type that in, Thomas, it was a little bit confusing, but we're distinguishing what you need to hold the contract and then what the contract will deliver.
Jim is asking, we noticed that there is no directors and officers insurance required. Was there a reason for that?
In the updated request for proposals, that's put, we actually did add directors and officers as one of the services we would like to extend to nonprofits, or excuse me, neighborhood associations.
The reason why it was not included originally is because, as Shuk mentioned, we don't require that of the folks who hold the contract with us. So the certificates of insurance that our nonprofit, our district coalition partners have been given to us just show the commercial liability. They have other paperwork because people want D&O insurance. Southwest Neighborhood Associations want D&O insurance. And so that's why in the first, we know that it was being provided, but the certificates they provide us don't necessarily call that out. So we made it as open as possible, but we heard that the neighborhood associations want to see it specifically listed. They want assurance because that's what we want. So that's why we updated that RFP.
Hey, can I add on this one? Thank you, sir. Polly, can you go back to that example certificate form, please? Yes. If I could elaborate a little bit on this answer. So again, absolutely right. So city requires only 4 commercial general liability, automobile, worker comp, and physical abuse and molestation. As you see, this form here lists only actually 2, and worker comp is not listed here because that comes through a different certificate. As for physical abuse and liability, that's the case as well. That would come through a different certificate. So when risk management looks at it and say, what minimum requirement organization have met? So this we can accept as a part of the contract. So these are all these listed. But the point was like when you go back to 17 organizations, those 17 neighborhood associations may not see, they satisfy the requirement, but in addition, they may say, well, we need this insurance. And one of those insurances, which came through the meetings with them, they said, well, we really need the directors and officers liability coverage. And in our investigation, we realized that yes, Sweeney, previous organization who provided insurance, they provided and bought that coverage, but they did not submit it to the city because it was not required from our part, but it was there available for organizations. So again, when I said when finalists would go back and meet with 17 groups, let's say they may identify directors and officers could be additional required, like for their purposes, or maybe something else. And that would kind of mold your budget and give you some ideas in working in those liabilities. And again, as I said, you can buy insurance for anything out there, but this form, we're specifically mentioned the ones which are required by the city, but that doesn't mean you can't buy anything in addition. So hope this clarifies it. Thank you.
And maybe you just answered that in that answer. Also, will each of the 17 have their own individual insurance coverage?
They will be listed as here. This will be one example, like in this example certificate, organization, the finalists will be listed here. And this organization who provides these insurances will have this next form. That's the reason for this form, CG 2026. And again, I didn't put all the 24 pages here, but if you go down the list, and I could email that separately to even in the process of this RFP, those organizations will be listed as additional insurance. Like all the names of neighborhood associations, all 17 of them will be listed there. And that's the point, they cannot buy insurance on their own. I mean, maybe they do. I mean, maybe some of them went ahead and purchased some of their own liabilities. I'm not aware of that. Maybe they have some insurance, but that's the purpose of this RFP, because they did not have infrastructure, nor budget, no resources. That's why we're doing this RFP, that where one organization would be providing the services, which is obtaining and procure and eventually purchasing insurance for all these 17 organizations, neighborhood associations.
We did answer the, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, Jim, did that answer your question? Because you could provide individual insurance coverage for 17 different groups, or you could have them named as named insured or named additional insured to the organization's overall coverage. So there are two different options. And the first option, everyone having their own coverage, is not one that any of our other partners have pursued. They have typically gone the second route, where they just have named 17 additional insured entities to their own organizational liability coverage. So that's, technically you could go that route, but we have not seen other groups do that, but technically you could. Does that answer your question, Jim or Nikki? Because at this point, when it gets to the insurance coverage and what it is and the difference between named insured and additional, it gets very specific.
Yes, thank you. So, and answer to Thomas. Yes, Thomas, please email me after this meeting, or when you have time, I'll send you this document in entirety, CG 2026, so you will be able to see that. And as a disclaimer, again, we're a program like a staff here, and when it comes to specific insurance and implementation of it, our risk management colleagues will be vetted to this process, and there will be more detailed answers if you have any specific insurance-specific related questions. Thank you.
And the next question was already answered. Can you confirm that the award amount does not include the insurance premiums? It does not include that. That's a separate amount. In addition to the 20,000. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Is that right?
You mean fiscal sponsorship?
It says, can you confirm that the award amount does not include insurance premiums? I'm assuming it covers the cost of the nonprofit that is helping and not the actual cost of the insurance.
I think it does include 20,000 is including the cost of the insurance per year. Am I right, Suk, Andrea?
And the reason why that we are proposing the budget format, your application, the way it is because in our two city staff district coalitions right now, we have nonprofit partners, and that is approximately what 10,500, the amount that Sweeney had paid for its 17 additional insured neighborhood associations. That is about what we pay in East Portland and North Portland. So the first 10,000 we believe will be the premium itself. And then the rest of the amount, 20,000 would be the cost for staffing. We're asking you though to check us on that because we want you to put your actual costs in. And if it costs you more than 20,000, we want to see that. We're open to it. Currently, because we have long-standing relationships with the other two nonprofits that provide insurance for North and East, we don't see those same expenses, but that's because they've been doing it for quite a long time. We realize in this RFP, there are some initial startup costs, and there's some, and also a different partner may have different expenses. So we're going to ask you to provide what you project to be the staffing costs, the premium costs, and then if it's more than 20,000, we want to see that reflected because we also want to have a better understanding of what it would take to deliver this service. And we know that 20,000 at this point is our best guess, but we also want to check it against reality. And we're going to ask you to just submit to us what it would actually you would invest to deliver this. So I hope that makes sense.
So may I also ask you to answer the next question of why this is restriction only, eligibility to 501c3s only?
Right, because from the city perspective, our legal perspective, the difference between a grant and a contract, this grant requires that you could be, that it be a 501c3. You could be incorporated, as you know, all of you know probably on this call, in the state of Oregon and just be a domestic corporation, and the tax status comes from the IRS. And so when we reviewed our grant agreement and our needs with our risk and attorney's office, it was determined that for this RFP, we needed a organization that serves Southwest Portland, doesn't have to be based there, and it needs the tax status as a 501c3.
Thank you.
I don't think I've heard this answer to this question. Would this grant cover the fee for service costs for fiscal sponsorships, or would the neighborhood associations pay that expense on their own?
I'll take that one. So again, such as in the budget, we're going to ask you, first of all, does your organization provide that type of service in the first place? And if the answer is currently not, please check no. But there was another question later, the next one that says, but if you intend to provide that service later, please note that in the narrative. So you currently don't do it, but if you want to share with us, you plan on doing it, when you're going to be able to do it, things like that, you could put that in the narrative. And then that's why we also want to know what that costs, what it looks like, and if all the stars align and the premium, the staffing, and additional services could be provided within the $20,000 limit, that would be fantastic, and we'll be open to that. And if it isn't, we would like to know if there's an opportunity to possibly work with the selected partner on additional support through other parts of our program budget as program needs are identified. So we're trying to use this RFP to gather a sense of how, if this relationship could meet multiple program and administrative needs. And so we're asking to explore with you through your application.
Matt makes commentary about the insurance industry is currently experiencing increased rates. It is likely the rates will be increasing in the next 3 years. Will the grant amount increase? If that happens, it kind of goes to your point that you would, what you just said, so because you want to hear about the actual costs based on what's happening right now.
We do project that the premiums are going to increase even for our existing partners over the next several years. And then, and especially for this, for serving Southwest neighborhoods, we know year 1, 2, and 3 will probably look different, not just because of increases in premium, but also the first year startup activities may not be necessary in year 2 and 3. There might be other functions in 2 and 3. So we think that some of the ways that the expenses play out over 3 years will be slightly different, reflecting, the ability to build upon previous administrative investments or responding to new and changing situations.
We had a clarifying question. You might have answered it. If the RFP states, in the RFP, it states that directors and office insurance are one of the 5 insurance required under the contract. However, if I heard Shook accurately, he stated that D&I insurance was optional. Am I understand this accurately?
Again, if I could clarify, for the city purposes, it is optional for us as our risk management looks at it. When our risk manager look at the risks of the organization, they would say, well, do they have these insurances I just mentioned, commercial, automobile, umbrella, and worker comp. However, the reason we listed directors and officers in our updated RFP is this. After, as part of this transition process, we've been meeting a lot with neighborhood associations. And one of the areas they expressed an interest and need to have directors and officers insurance. So for their purposes, it is kind of, they requiring it in their thinking that it might be needed, but for city purposes, it's optional. I hope I did not confuse you.
Yeah. Someone's asking, can a volunteer act? Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask if I answered the question. So.
And then one of our attendees is asking, can a volunteer accident medical policy be utilized in place of workers' compensation for 100% volunteer orgs? It's difficult to underwrite workers' comp for volunteers' expense and is at times unavailable. And I think, Sook, you spoke to that it's kind of confusing because, do you want to kind of restate that?
You're right. If you're the one nonprofit partner contracted with us, you are required to provide workers' comp, insurance if you have employees, which you probably will. But then when you have that contract, we know that the neighborhood associations, they're volunteer based, they don't have employees. So we would not expect you to offer the workers' comp to them. We're not expecting you to underwrite workers' comp for volunteers, but we just the general liability under DNOs, et cetera. So a volunteer accident medical policy would not be necessary in our perspective.
Okay, looks like we just got a couple more questions here in the chat. In addition to the budget and narratives, can you please specify what additional attachment documents deliverables are needed with the application?
I can take that. So again, as part of this process, when we identify finalists, we will be starting drafting our grant agreement. And to grant agreement, there are essential attachments to that grant agreement, and that would include other documents such as budget, we'll have that, and our scope of work, which would describe what those expectations are from the organization partner, and that would include deliverables and metrics. So yes, the answer to your question, when you see grant agreement, that will have those parts in it, and that will have templates and invoices, like such as when you invoices for requesting funds and other lists. So there are 5, 6 additional attachments to the grant agreement.
And then we're getting lots of kudos for offering this call and answering questions. Do we have any additional questions that didn't get in the chat, or maybe did I miss any ones in there? And I think everyone is unmuted. If you want to speak, you could speak out loud as well.
Polly, I saw a request to get participants' contacts email to each participant. I don't know if that's possible, and that was the question.
For the who's attending the workshop here? Yeah.
Yeah, who attended this evening.
So clarifying follow-up, Ashok, you in your answer to Damon's question, you talked about what is required with the grant agreement. And I think Damon was asking just specifically with the application, other than the budget and the narrative.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I think it's a budget narrative. Yeah, and questions filled out for this application. I don't anticipate seeing any other um, we eligibility says like a financial statements. You could provide a copy of your recent like a financial standing document. I mean, we can cross that bridge when we identify the finals.
Okay, I don't see any more in chat and I don't hear any other questions.
There's a question Matt just put in. I don't know
Oh,
if you could expand that, Matt. Which of the, what do you mean by for each organization, Matt? I don't know if you could unmute and just ask.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
yeah.
Yeah, actually
Yeah.
just wondering if there could be a list provided of the actual services each organization's providing. It'll be needed just to come up with an estimate for the premiums and if the coverage would be available.
I think Matt is referring to the 17 neighborhood associations.
Yes, exactly. So that way, responding to the RFP, when different organizations talk to their insurance professional, they'll have something to give them of substance.
Yes, there's a list that there's a list of the type of activities and even the schedule that from previous years that we could to send out to you so you can have a sense of what types of activities people are engaging in.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then Thomas is asking, only panelists can see questions, question mark? I'm not sure what that means.
Thomas, do you have your chat open? All the participants should be able to see questions in the chat, but I'm not sure why we're not doing anything to prevent you from seeing the questions.
But we did.
Yes, and answers to Damon's question. Yes, 990 would be perfect example of a supplemental document and to supplement as part of the eligibility process and for us to evaluate the financial standing of the organization. The answer is yes. Yes. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Feel free to just submit your narrative and your budget as we in the application guidelines, and then as we need more information, or if you find that we have questions about your applications, then what we want to do is prevent you from having to put too much, everyone doing a whole lot of work when we may just need to be able to get the first level of information and then have continuing conversation with viable candidates.
Thank you. So can I add a little bit to Thomas's question, the list of activities? I would say think of it at this point in terms of the insurance terms, because like all these liabilities could be very well associated and related to types of meetings every organization is doing, like from board meeting to community meeting, gatherings, movies in the park, all those things. But please keep in mind that I'm just a thought that maybe for another 3, 4, 5, 6 months, we'll still be in a COVID environment where most of the meetings would take place online. So again, I'm not the insurance specialist or broker, and that would be a good question to insurance broker when you go back to them for the quote and say, well, if this is any different, if these meetings are over online for the certain portion of the year. I'm just giving you a heads up that yes, we'll provide list of activities, which is basically you think of any community organization doing in the neighborhood. But again, exposure to the public is may not be personal for the next 3-4 months, but over online, just those specifics as well. And you can clarify those with the insurance broker.
And there was one last question from Damon here. If there's 501c3 that already has a COLI with the city of Portland, would they need to submit an additional OCOCI that includes the appropriate insurances, or would they simply need to update it already and file with the city with additional insurances? I don't know, Shuk, do you know how to answer that one?
I'm reading question one more time. Sorry. I would say, again, as a program person, I do not have any direct response right now on this. And this is something I can find out through the process of the RFP for you. If you could email me this question separately, I'll be able to get the answer for you.
Excellent. Well, if there are no questions, just want to thank everybody for being here. Was somebody trying to get in? Okay. Just want to thank everyone for attending, for taking time out of your day. We'll be following up with you with some of those pieces of information that you requested. I will be posting this online as well. And, you have Shuk's contact information here. Should you think of additional questions or need support as you're filling out the application, Shuk will be available to correspond with during that time. So thank you again, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.